Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Newcomb-Aludo, Chair-elect of CMC. It's great to see everyone today. Today's event, Ohio U.S. Senatorial Forum, is part of CMC's political season sponsored by Hannah News Service and the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, each represented by their associates and friends here today. So let's thank them. Today it's a little different. Of special note, today questions will be submitted in writing. You will find a piece of paper for this in your flyer forum, and there should be an extra pen on the table if you look for it. Please include your name with your question. Members of CMC's program committee will begin to collect these midway through the discussion. The best questions will be selected for content and relevance and read aloud by our program committee volunteers during the question and answer portion. Now, without further ado, won't you please help me welcome the 68th Governor of Ohio and current candidate for U.S. Senate, Ted Strickland. Governor Strickland will start us off with opening remarks and then join Colleen Marshall for conversation. Governor Strickland, the podium is yours.
Oh, well, thank you, and I want to thank the Columbus Metropolitan Club. You know, the very first speech I gave after I decided to run for governor was to the Metropolitan Club, my Golden Rule speech. And the last speech I gave as I was leaving the governor's office was to the Metropolitan Club. So it's great to be back with you today. Most of you know that I came from a working class family. My dad was a steelworker. My mom raised 9 kids. My brothers finished concrete, and I was the first in my family to be able to go to college. My family had its share of struggles and hardships. Before I was born, my family's first home was destroyed by a flood. A second home was lost to hard times. And when I was about 5 years old, our third home burned to the ground. So I learned at a very early age what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, and how one bad break can cause real hardship in a family. And that's why I have spent my life as a minister, a teacher, a psychologist, a congressman, and as Ohio's governor, fighting for working people. That's who I came from. That's who I care about. Now, you know, in the last 30 years, times have been tough for regular working people. I call it the middle class squeeze. For 30 years, people have worked hard, productivity has increased. There was a time when productivity increased, wages increased correspondingly. But for the last several decades, wealth has been created. It's been concentrated in the top 1% of the richest people in America, while regular working people have seen their wages remain flat. Now, nearly everything it takes to live a middle-class life has gone up in the last several decades. The cost of housing, food, education, medical care, retirement security, all those things have gone up. Wages for most people have remained flat, and the middle class is feeling squeezed. Now, this didn't just happen by accident. It was planful. It's happened because politicians, those on Wall Street, the well-connected, the powerful, the influential, the wealthy, have conspired with people like my opponent, Senator Rob Portman. They've looked out for their rich and the powerful, and the struggling middle class has been largely left behind. Now, if you want to know why so many Ohioans and so many Americans are cynical about politics, just look at this Senate race. Senator Portman and his wealthy friends have spent over $59 million in mostly false and misleading attack ads. More money has been spent against me in this Senate race than any other Senate candidate in America, perhaps in American history at this point in time. And most of it has come from wealthy billionaire out-of-staters who are trying to buy Ohio's Senate seat. The corporations and the wealthy interests are looking out for themselves, and they want to buy this Senate seat, and in return, the current senator, Senator Portman, is selling us out. And I want to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Higher education. The accumulated debt of student debt in this country is estimated to be about $1.3 trillion. 70% of Ohio graduates leaving our public institutions in Ohio today are leaving with an average debt of $30,000, many of them leaving with a debt well beyond that. Well, there are some things we can do to correct that. We could allow students with high interest rates, I've talked to students with interest rates of 9 and 10%, to refinance that debt at a lower interest rate. You know, you can do that on just about every debt you have in America except student debt. And so there have been efforts in the Congress to allow students to do that. But Senator Portman has opposed those efforts. Why? I can only speculate that the big banks and those who are making money off of students don't want him to do it. We need a higher education system that is affordable. I'm supporting a higher education system supported by Hillary Clinton. It says that if you're from a family that makes less than $125,000 a year, you can go to a public institution in your state tuition free. It says that if you go to a community college, you can go there free. It says that you should only have to pay back 10% of your after-tax income on that debt, so that if you want to be a teacher, you know, teachers don't make a lot of money, but a lot of people may want to be a teacher and they have debt, they can afford to be a teacher and be able to pay back that debt. So that's one issue where we disagree fundamentally. Gun safety. I support comprehensive background checks, including gun shows and internet sales. And I think that if a person is deemed to be so dangerous that they are not allowed to get on an airplane to fly, that they ought not to be able to go into a gun store and buy a semi-automatic weapon. And so there are bipartisan efforts in the Congress, in the Senate, to try to close these loopholes. And in fact, a Republican bill by Senator Collins from Maine was put forth that just said, if you are on this suspected terrorist watch list, you ought not to be able to go buy a gun. Senator Portman voted against his own colleague's bill. Why? Because the NRA has spent more money against me in this race. As of a week and a half ago, it was about $1.9 million. They've spent more money against me than all other House and Senate candidates in the country combined. So we disagree about that. Retirement security. Senator Portman, as George Bush's budget director, advocated for the privatization of Social Security, gambling with Social Security on Wall Street. He actually voted to turn Medicare into a voucher program. He wants to raise the retirement age. You know, I said that my brothers were cement masons. When you're a cement mason, in fact, I've got a 51-year-old niece who's a cement mason today. When you're a cement mason, you get down on your hands and knees and you finish concrete. And your knees become bummed and your fingers become gnarled, your back becomes bent. You can't finish concrete when you are 67, 69, 70 years old, as some would advocate, before retirement and Medicare are available to people. Senator Portman and I really disagree about that. The auto rescue, so important to Ohio. At a time that the auto industry was on its knees, I fought for the auto rescue, as did President Obama and Senator Sherrod Brown and other Democrats in the Congress. Senator Portman sent out a statement that said it was a lousy deal for Ohio, and he objected to governmental influence in this industry. Women's health care, can we talk about that? I believe Roe v. Wade is settled law. Rob Portman wants to overturn Roe v. Wade. He's voted to defund Planned Parenthood. And he has said that a woman's boss should be able to tell her whether or not her insurance provides contraceptive coverage. And he's voted 5 times against pay equity for women. The Supreme Court, under the Constitution, when there's a vacancy on the court, the president has a constitutional obligation to put forth a qualified nominee for that court, and the Senate has a constitutional obligation to provide advice and consent. Senator Portman and Mitch McConnell and others have refused to grant Judge Garland a hearing and a vote. Now, I'm not saying he should vote to confirm him. That's something that he has to decide as a senator. But he's not doing his job. And I can only conclude that Senator Portman wants Donald Trump to reshape the United States Supreme Court. So Senator Portman, I believe, is selling out Ohio in another very, very important way. He says Donald Trump should be the president of our country. Now, he is so ashamed of Donald Trump that he won't stand beside him on a platform. He won't get his picture taken with him. And yet he says he wants him to be the president. What's that say about Senator Portman? The thing that I conclude from that is that he believes his own political well-being is more important to him than what's right for this country. I believe in his heart of hearts, he knows that Donald Trump is totally unfit to be the president. Donald Trump has said outrageous things. He said American wages are too high. He's called women pigs and other disgusting terms. He's actually stood in front of a group like this and mocked a person with a physical disability. A man who would be the president of our country would mock someone with a physical disability. He's insulted the Gold Star family. He has insulted prisoners of war. He has called America, and these are his words, he said, this country is a hellhole, and he wants to be our president. And now we find out that it is very likely that he hasn't paid taxes for some 20 or so years. So Senator Portman still thinks he ought to be the president. Now, let me just conclude my remarks by saying this race is competitive. I'm behind, but I can catch up and I can win. But there's a reason why so much money is being spent in this Ohio race, because they know that if Rob Portman remains the senator, he will be their guy. They can go to him, and he will do their bidding. And I think they also know something about me, that I have had, always have, and always will fight for the little guy, the average person. So I believe that when someone works hard and plays by the rules, they should be able to have a decent life, to have a good job, send their kids to a good school, afford education for their loved ones, have a secure retirement, and live out their lives as free Americans. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Governor. And thank you for agreeing to answer questions. I want to say up front that Senator Portman was also invited to take part in this Metropolitan Club Forum. He is not here today, obviously. You might have seen some of his signs on the way in. The candidate did not show up, however. But we want everyone to know that an invitation was extended, and it is still open to Senator Portman if he would like to join us for a future forum. But we welcome you, and thank you for being with us. Governor, and let's talk about those attack ads, because we are all seeing them ad nauseum. It's counterintuitive for somebody who works at a television station to say, we're getting a little tired of these ads. But
I've made you rich.
Yeah. But thank you for that extra vacation week I'm getting this year. No, we do want to ask you, though, they are very hard-hitting, and they attack your term as governor. Specifically, they point to jobs that left this state and went to neighboring states during a time of recession. So here's your opportunity. Answer those attack ads.
Well, we had a national recession. America lost about 9 million jobs. America lost about 800,000 jobs the very month before Barack Obama became president. It was a national recession, and Ohio was affected by that. Now, this charge that we had jobs leave Ohio and go to other states. Well, of course, but we had jobs come into Ohio from other states as well. And I could give you a list of jobs that came into Ohio, companies that came into Ohio from other states during the time that I was governor. But these are scurrilous attacks. You know, they talk about the rainy day fund. Why do you have a rainy day fund? You have a rainy day fund for when it's raining. And my friends, it was not raining, it was pouring. And we were losing revenue. And so I used the rainy day fund for its intended purpose. It would have been irresponsible for me to have cut vital services to the people of this state and left $1 billion in the rainy day fund. So I used it for its intended purpose. When I left office, Ohio, according to the Federal Reserve, had the 5th fastest growing economy in America and the fastest growing economy in the Midwest. I gave John Kasich a recovering economy. Unemployment was coming down and jobs were being added. Now, some of those ads, you know, they tend not to bother me a lot because I understand what they are. But one really bothered me. And it was the one with the golden toilet, right? So can we talk a minute about that?
Sure.
So there's an ad that implied that I took money away from children's programs, spent $250,000 to modernize my bathroom in the governor's residence. Well, let me tell you the story about the governor's residence bathroom. There are some docents here. Maybe they can describe it to you. But the bathroom was a pretty primitive bathroom, small little basin and so on and so forth. So when I moved into the governor's residence, the folks who take care of the residents said, this bathroom needs to be modernized. We want to modernize it. And I said, no way. We're not going to spend tax dollars to modernize my bathroom. So I went to Lowe's. I took my own money and bought a can of paint, and I painted that bathroom. That's the only improvements that happened in that bathroom while I was governor. Now, so why would they make that charge? Before Bob Taft left office, he set aside a sum of money to make some repairs at the governor's residence. And among those was to establish public bathrooms in the carriage house that were handicapped accessible. The governor's residence has about 20,000 visitors a year. We would have buses come in from Cleveland, a lot of older folks, no handicapped accessible bathroom, and only one bathroom in the governor's residence that they could get to. There was a line from here to that water out there. And so it was Governor Taft's money that he had allocated. I had nothing to do with the use of those bathrooms. It wasn't my bathroom. But that's just an example of how these ads can be just totally, utterly scurrilous and misleading. And they're being paid for by people who, excuse my language, don't give a damn about Ohio or Ohioans. All they're trying to do is to buy power and to hold on to that Senate seat because Rob Portman is their guy.
You know, speaking of Rob Portman being their guy, traditionally labor in this state has backed Democrats. That has been the kind of the stronghold for the Democratic Party. We're seeing ads. The Teamsters now are backing Rob Portman.
Can I speak to that?
Oh, that's why I'm asking you the question. But I also want to point out, while I'm doing that, that your stronghold is your home area down that whole Appalachian County. And you and I are both kids of Appalachia. And we know about the steel mills and the coal mines. And Donald Trump came in and did very well in that Appalachian part of the state. Yes. Hillary Clinton is not doing well there. You are not doing as well there as people might expect. So how do you explain this shift in this traditionally Democratic supportive labor group?
Well, I was in Appalachia yesterday. I was in Athens and Bridgeport and Marietta and Steubenville with former President Bill Clinton. And he was beautifully received, as a matter of fact. Just let me talk about the Teamsters. I think the Teamsters got the endorsement of Rob Portman because he may have done something that was unethical, perhaps even if it could be proven illegal. Because the National Secretary Treasurer of the Teamsters Union was on C-SPAN. And he was asked very directly, why did you endorse Rob Portman? And he said, the sole reason, that's his word, the sole reason that we endorsed Senator Portman is that we got a commitment from him regarding how he would vote on one of our issues. That sounds like a tit for tat for me. These are Washington decisions. A lot of Teamsters in Ohio are going to vote for me. And let me tell you, a lot of coal miners are going to vote for me. A lot of coal miners are going to vote for me. And so...
Even though they are so opposed to the programs, the policies of Hillary Clinton, who has made some pretty blatant statements about we're going to put coal miners out of business, and you are very closely aligned to Hillary Clinton.
But, Colleen, let's listen to the Secretary Clinton's entire statement. Coal mines are closing and coal mine jobs are being lost. And for a lot of reasons. The primary reason is the market. Natural gas is plentiful, it's cheaper, and it's cleaner. And industry is switching to natural gas for economic reasons. That's the primary reason that coal is suffering right now. Now, if people had listened to Senator or Secretary Clinton's entire statement, she said, we cannot forget these people who have powered our country. And Secretary Clinton has a $30 billion plan to help poor Appalachian communities and Indian communities. She's the only one who's been talking about actually doing something for Appalachia and these communities. So it's important to take her entire plan and look at it and see that months and months and months ago, not just recently as a presidential candidate, but early on when she started her campaign for president, she brought out this $30 billion plan for Appalachian communities. So she's trying to talk about what can be done in a practical way to actually help these communities. Donald Trump stands in front of a coal mine and says, we're going to open this mine. He can't do that. He knows he can't do that. But he's presenting really, really simple answers to complex problems. And that's part of his appeal. I will admit that he has an appeal. But when you get below the surface, you understand that there is nothing there.
Let's talk about that appeal because, Barack Obama handily carried Ohio both times, and there were expectations that Hillary Clinton would do much better in Ohio than the polls are presently indicating.
Yes.
This is the battleground state, the one battleground state that she is continuing to struggle in at this point. So how do you explain that, and how is that going to impact your Senate race?
Well, the election's not over. And I fully believe, strongly believe that Secretary Clinton, Hillary Clinton, is going to carry Ohio. I will admit to you that Ohio is a little tighter right now than Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and some of these other states. But we've still got 37 days to go. And we're going to have a second debate, and we'll have a third debate. And I think the people of Ohio will come to see that this man is unfit to be president. Think about who he is, what he has done, and what he says. He says he didn't pay taxes because he's smart. Well, somebody's got to carry the tax burden for this country. Somebody's got to pay for our teachers, our education, our military, our veterans, our infrastructure. Donald Trump's not doing it. So let's just actually step back and listen to what he says and think of what he's done. And he is unfit to be the president. That's why the Bush family certainly are not willing to get behind him and support him. That's why the Cincinnati Enquirer endorsed Hillary Clinton. First time they've done that in 100 years. And one of the things they wrote in that endorsement, Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to this country. From the Cincinnati Enquirer. That Arizona paper had not endorsed a Democrat for well over 100 years. More and more people are understanding that Donald Trump is a threat to this country. He talks about nuclear weapons as if we're talking about, I don't know, some childish toy. He praises Vladimir Putin, who's a KGB thug, has his opponents assassinated, has invaded Crimea and in the Ukraine, and he talks about him being a strong. I think, part of my fear about Donald Trump is I think he wants to be a leader for America in the same way that Putin is a leader for Russia. He seems not to have any understanding of his constitutional responsibilities as a president and a commander-in-chief. He wants to spread nuclear weapons. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of Republicans, a lot of there's a reason why Governor John Kasich, is unwilling to support this man. And I applaud Governor Kasich for his integrity and courage. And I criticize Rob Portman in the face of this and what Donald Trump could do to this country. He continues to support him as president.
Let's talk about some issues now. You touched on health care for American families. There is widespread agreement that because of the Affordable Care Act, premiums are about to go up sharply for middle-class families. This is going to be a costly year for people, much more than expected when the Affordable Care Act was first voted into place. You and Hillary Clinton have both supported the Affordable Care Act. Do you agree that there needs to be revisions, or do you think we should just go forward as planned?
No, I mean, I've said all along, and I think most reasonable people have said that there needs to be tweaks and changes to the Affordable Care Act. But Colleen, the important thing to me, when we talk about Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, is today about 800,000 Ohioans have medical coverage now that they did not have. 800,000 fellow Ohioans. And so we need to applaud that. And I've applauded John Kasich for his expansion of Medicaid in Ohio. I think it was absolutely the right thing to have done. That doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean that it can't be changed and altered. And Bill Clinton just yesterday was talking about the fact of this problem that you've identified. For people who are outside or just above the threshold for qualifying to get into the exchanges or to receive subsidies, their premiums are going up and their co-payments are going up. We can speak to that. We can make necessary changes. But what Rob Portman wants to do is to get rid of it. And he offers nothing in its place that I'm aware of. Now, when he says he wants to get rid of Obamacare, he is saying to 800,000 Ohioans, we want to take your health care away from you. And Obamacare does a lot of wonderful things. It prevents insurance companies from punishing people for having pre-existing conditions. It's really good for women, and it prevents insurance companies from charging women a lot more than they charge men for medical coverage. It does some wonderful things, and it's doing wonderful things. We can modify it and change it in certain ways. Quite frankly, I believe we need to have a public option. And if I was going to, start a new healthcare system from scratch, I don't think we would have the system we have today. I mean, the single-payer approach is by far the most efficient approach. Medicare is the most efficient deliverer of health care in this country, with operating costs of, I don't know, somewhere around 4 to 5%, where, major insurance companies may have operating costs of approaching 30% or so. So it's not a perfect system, but it's a lot better than it was. A lot more people are getting coverage, and overall, we are a better people because of it.
You are advocating the free tuition payments for families who make less than $125,000. That is most Americans. Most Americans are in that category.
It's about 80% of Ohio
Somebody
families.
has to pay for that.
Absolutely.
And if you are looking at the tuition costs, and I have, we put 2 kids through college that we paid for, but they're paying for graduate programs. It's an incredible expense. And they are both tens of thousands of dollars in debt for their graduate level programs. So when you look at those costs, where's the payment going to come from? Is that tax dollars? And does that kind of justify what Donald Trump is saying about the need to increase taxes dramatically to support the programs of Hillary Clinton?
Well, I'll speak to the pay for in a minute, but I want to put things in context. This country and the state of Ohio has disinvested in higher education. I don't think there's any question about that. One of the first things I did when I was governor was ask all of the college and university presidents to meet with me in Columbus. And I remember starting out that conversation by saying to them, I am not your enemy, I am your friend. But you've got to work with me to do something about these escalating tuition costs. And in my first budget, I froze tuition at the undergraduate level. And I believe we were first or second in this nation in the low increases in college tuition during the 4 years that I was governor. And we did that in the midst of a recession. I believe there are certain identifiable reasons why we are where we are today. One is when state governments have gone looking for money, it's been easy for them to go to higher education. They've gotten less pushback when they've cut from higher education than when they take on other aspects of the budget. Secondly, I think a lot of our institutions have forgotten that their primary goal is to provide a high-quality, affordable education for students. We've got unhealthy competition among our institutions, our state institutions. They ought to be working together for the purpose of educating Ohio's kids rather than trying to build empires. Now, some people have done really good in this country over the last decade or two, really well. They've become very, very wealthy. A lot of our corporations have decided that they want to save a little money by moving jobs or money offshore. So I think there are ways that we can go to the people who have benefited the most from what this country has provided. You know, they may want to pretend they did it all themselves. None of us get through this life by ourselves. Every individual and every company, every corporation benefits from what this country provides them in terms of national security, in terms of the rule of law, in terms of having great research facilities, educational facilities, a physical infrastructure. They all benefit from what this country provides, and they ought to be expected to contribute more than they have recently. And we can do that, and we can find the resources to educate our kids. Now, I'm not asking for something that's way out of balance, but we've lost balance in this country. We have lost balance. The tax burden, beginning in the 80s, if you look at what's happened to the tax burden in this country, the tax burden has been cut for the richest and shifted more and more onto the backs of regular working people. We need to recognize that, and we need to correct it. And if we do that, we will have the resources we need to provide an education for our kids. And it's in the best interest of the country. We've got to have an educated workforce in order for this country to have an economic future.
All right, Governor, we are going to take questions now. These are questions that were written by audience members. They're going to be read by some of our program committee members. And we have tried to pre-select them so that we get a mix, a balance, and a fair look at what the audience wants to know about. So, Carol, if you'll read our first question.
I'm Carol Looper, and I'm asking a question on behalf of Julie Keckstein. How many times have you and will you be on the same stage as Senator Portman before November 8th?
Well, I wrote Senator Portman a letter asking him to participate in at least 5 debates in the various sectors of Ohio, central, north, south, east, west. He responded by suggesting we have 2 debates. I finally got him up to 3 debates. I would love to have at least 5, but we're going to have 3 debates. One's going to be here in Columbus, one's going to be in Youngstown, Ohio, and one's going to be in Cleveland, Ohio. And they all will take place during the month of October, obviously. Unless we do it 3 days before the election.
Next, please.
I'm Bill Lafayette, and I'm asking a question on behalf of Garrett Anderson. I know Senator Sherrod Brown is up for re-election in 2018. Do you think his leveling the playing field law has made a difference for Ohio workers in standing up to illegal imports?
Well, Sherrod is a dear friend of mine, and he is up for re-election in 2018. And I applaud Sherrod. Sherrod and I have very similar histories when it comes to these trade deals. We were both in the House when NAFTA passed, as was Senator Portman. Sherrod and I voted no. Portman voted yes. Portman voted 14 times to grant China most favored nation trade status. I voted 14 times opposed to that. Senator Portman called himself the quarterback for CAFTA. When he was George Bush's trade representative, he recommended to President Bush that we not punish China for dumping steel into this country. He also said that to take on China for currency manipulation would be counterproductive. These are positions that he is not expressing today. But I really believe that Senator Sherrod Brown is a real fighter for Ohio's middle class and for Ohio's workers, and I do believe that what he's doing could have a major impact on, a beneficial impact on Ohio.
And next, please.
I'm Carol Mary, and I am asking virtually the same question from two different people, Carter Stewart and also Tripp Lazarus. So the question is, what is your path to victory? How do you come from behind? And what is your plan to actually win this thing?
Yeah. Well, we've got a little money, don't have nearly as much money as my opponent, but we've got a little money, and quite frankly, I'm meeting with my staff this afternoon to plan out the final 30 or so days of this campaign, where we spend that money, what our final message is going to be. And in the meantime, I'm continuing to travel around Ohio. As I said, I was in Appalachia yesterday. I can tell you, Senator Portman has tried to imply that I've had an invisible campaign, that I'm not really up to the job, that I'm not energetic. I have traveled over 61,000 miles in Ohio in the last 17 months. How do I know that? Because when I hired young Taylor Myers to be my driver, I took my Ford Escape in for the 100,000-mile checkup. That Ford Escape now has over 161,000 miles, equivalent to almost 2.5 times around the circumference of the Earth. I didn't know how far it was around the Earth, so I asked Siri. She told me. It's a little less than 25,000 miles. And so, you know, we've been very active and we'll continue to be very active. I don't, you know, I'm just going to be real honest with you here. I don't know if I'm going to win. Nobody knows that until the votes are counted. But I can tell you this, I haven't given up. And I have some confidence in the people of Ohio that they'll be able to look through all of the scurrilous ads, all of the false charges. You know, people say to me, oh, you got to speak to this rainy day issue. And I say to them, but you know, it was raining. And then they say, oh yeah, it was, wasn't it? So some of the charges aren't that difficult to answer. But you know, I mean, let's face it, folks. $59 million is a lot of money. And it's been almost all negative ads distorting my record. And so has it had an effect? Absolutely. When we started this race, the Quinnipiac poll had me up 9 points. And quite frankly, I was either tied or a little ahead until about 4 months ago. You know, David Pepper, the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, has said that perhaps with the exception of LeBron James and Senator John Glenn, nobody could have withstood what I've withstood in this race and still been in a competitive position. So I feel pretty good about the fact that a lot of Ohioans remember me as governor. They know we went through tough times, but we did it together, and we did it responsibly. And I protected priorities when I was governor, and that's what I want to do as senator.
And the next question, please.
Yes, I'm Kermit Whitfield, and I'm asking a question on behalf of David Hanselman. Many people associated with one of the major parties refuse to recognize the science documenting global warming. Do you think global warming is an issue our country must deal with?
Absolutely. I think you have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand. You have to discount science if you do not accept the fact that climate is changing. And I believe human activity has a great deal to do with that. Now, my understanding, if I understand Senator Portman's position correctly, he will admit that the climate seems to be changing, but he's unwilling to say that human activity is significantly responsible. Well, I think the science is very, very clear, and that's why, as governor, we went to work and we passed a very significant energy bill in Ohio, and we did it by forming a coalition of folks. The academic community, labor, the Ohio Manufacturers Association worked with us on our energy bill. And we saved Ohioans an estimated $1 billion in electricity costs, and investments were being made in Ohio in wind, especially, solar to a lesser extent. But we were seeing Ohio becoming a cutting-edge state when it comes to advanced and renewable energy. Sadly, this current legislature is trying to completely obliterate the progress that we made there. But climate change is real. It's an existential threat. You know, when I left the governor's office, one of the things I did was spend several months at the UN, at the U.S. mission at the UN. And I talked with people from island nations who were seeing their islands disappear. And it is happening. Now, thankfully, in Ohio, we are not being as directly impacted. But what's happening to Lake Erie, I believe, is partly the result of climate change. These algae blooms, I think, are exacerbated by increased temperatures. There are other reasons as well. But we are seeing the effects of climate change nearly every day. And I believe we've got a moral responsibility to do all that we can to correct this and to save this planet. And just let me say this. I've got great confidence in Mother Nature. I think Mother Nature, Mother Earth, is going to be just fine in the long run. I just want to make sure that human beings are part of that long-run future. There are self-correcting measures, I think, built into our environment. But we've got a responsibility as human beings to do what we can to mitigate the damage that is being done.
Carol?
This is a question on behalf of Bill Lafayette. If you are elected, you will vote for at least one Supreme Court justice. Please discuss your thought process in evaluating candidates.
Well, thank you for that question, Carol. I think, in my judgment, the most serious threat facing our nation going forward is what president and what Senate is going to refashion the United States Supreme Court. We know the power of that court, and we know the damage they can do. Citizens United declaring that corporations are people and that money is speech has corrupted our political system. You know, if I was having a fair fight with Senator Portman, although he would raise more money into his personal campaign than I would raise into mine, I would beat him hands down. If he did not have $50 or so million propping him up from outside, this would not even be a competitive race, in my judgment. Now, the Supreme Court is so important, but there are certain things that I believe we need to consider when we consider reshaping that court. I believe that we need to honor precedent in nearly, except in very unusual cases. And I believe Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to make a choice, is established law. And I could not find myself supporting someone for the Supreme Court that I felt was going to try to overturn Roe v. Wade. And you know, there are other rights, voting rights, labor rights, environmental protections. All of those things will be decided, I think, ultimately by that court. And it is very possible that the next president will be able to reshape that court by appointing not just someone to fill Justice Scalia's empty seat, but perhaps 2 or 3 additional seats. And it will affect this country not for a year, not for a decade, but for decades into the future. And I think that's a real threat if Donald Trump were to become president.
This is a question from David Kandel. How do we get Congress to end the gridlock and partisanship which have left so many important issues unaddressed?
Well, that's an important question, but a difficult one to answer. Just let me share with you out of my own experience. When I became governor, I brought a round table, like the tables you're sitting at, into the governor's office. And when I was a governor, my first 2-year budget, both houses were controlled by Republicans in Ohio. And we passed a budget with only one dissenting vote. Now, how did that happen? It happened because every week I met with Speaker Houston and with Senator Harris from the Senate, and we sat around that round table and we argued and debated and disagreed, but we all felt like we had a responsibility to govern. And we made compromises and we moved this state forward. When I first suggested an energy bill, I remember Speaker Houston, now Secretary of State Houston, saying to me, Ohioans will never accept a mandate. And by the time that year was over with, and we had worked together as we did, he not only was willing to accept a mandate, he was willing to see it enhanced. It was because we were willing to talk and negotiate and compromise. And that's got to happen in Washington if anything's going to get done. And that's my approach, to try to find common ground, to be willing to compromise, to not demand that everything you want has got to be agreed to by the opposition.
And our final question
Is from Neil Johnson, and it is the future of charter schools, good, bad, or ugly?
You know, in my first State of the State address, I invite you to go back and read about it. I called for a moratorium on any additional charter schools in Ohio until we had put in place appropriate transparency and accountability measures. That was a long time ago. And we didn't get it accomplished because of the power and the influence of the charter school lobby. But can you imagine how much better off Ohio would be today and how many young lives would not have been negatively affected if, in fact, we had been able to do that? I wasn't saying no charter schools or no more charter schools, but I was saying we do not have in Ohio the proper accountability standards in place. Now, we have seen Ohio taxpayers raped by the charter school for-profit entities in this state and the e-school. It's shameful. It is shameful. It's an embarrassment. I think it is, if it's not illegal theft, it's moral theft of public resources. And I think thousands of our young people have been deprived of the opportunity to get a decent education because of the power of the charter school lobby in this state. And I would call upon, one of the reasons that I want Ron O'Brien defeated in this prosecutor's race is because I want someone in that prosecutor's office that will get serious about what's happened with the scrubbing of the charter school data and hold people accountable. The people of Ohio have a right to be outrageous and furious. And it continues. Now, there have been improvements, obviously, but they've been forced improvements. And too many young kids have been injured as a result of the lack of accountability within the charter school movement in Ohio.
Governor, we thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you. Thank you so much. We stopped right on time, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We're pretty good at this.
I hope you enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation with cookies and coffee in the back. Remember, you can view and share all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our sponsors once more, Hannah News Bureau and Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. And our speaker, Governor Ted Strickland and Colleen Marshall. Thank you. And thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you again soon.